Mr. Groza, how are you?
Thank you. I'm fine, more or less.
Good. I just want to remind everybody that this is a production of the International Conflict Resolution Center. You can find us at www.icrcenter.org, on Facebook at Conflict Center. I'm sorry, on Twitter at Conflict Center, and Facebook at ICR Center. We are a not-for-profit, unaffiliated, non-governmental entity focusing on frozen conflicts in the Black Sea region, Eastern Europe, and the Caucasus. And we are delighted to have Mr. Iulian Groza, Executive Director of the Institute for European Policy Studies in Moldova, with us today. Just to remind everybody, this is being recorded as a resource for our website and for people doing research on the region. Again, Mr. Groza, we are delighted to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me. A good occasion also to touch base on developments in Moldova through a more security perspective. I understand that one of your goals as an organization is to look into the conflicts in the region. Just one disclaimer from the very beginning. I'm not a security expert. I'm more having experience in diplomatic world. Currently, I'm not active diplomat. I'm leading indeed this think tank, Institute for European Policies and Reforms from Moldova. We are rather young think tank, but very much looking at the issues. Yeah. We're very much looking at the issues of good governance, security, rule of law in Moldova, trying to bridge with fellow colleagues of think tanks in the region, European Union, cross-Atlantic. But as well, we're busy in trying to talk and advocate for the modernization of the country, for its development as a democratic state. And of course, there are a lot of challenges that Moldova is exposed to, a lot of external challenges, internal challenges, and Transnistrian conflict is one of them, and it has a lot of ramifications, also involving other actors in the region, in particular Russia Federation.
Yeah, that's why we are delighted to have you to shed light on that. I just wanted to, I forgot in my excitement to get you on, I forgot to tell people who I was. I'm Professor Christopher Chambers. I'm a professor at Georgetown University, and I am chair of the board at the ICRcenter.org. Now, Mr. Groza, let me start. We're going to get into Romania's role currently and historically soon, but I wanted to take you back to 1992 when ethnic Russian Moldovans in Transnistria, with the assistance of Moscow, more or less, established this de facto, maybe not de jure, but de facto government in Tiraspol. Now, how would you describe the current state of affairs politically? Not necessarily militarily and security-wise, but just how would you describe generally the state of affairs right now in 2021?
Well, first, let me start with the fact with 1992, I was in the school. I will not give you a perspective really as an observant. I would probably address it from the analysis we have done in my different capacities.
That's fine.
But at the same time, just few aspects I think are important. What we had in '92, there was a war which was supported by Russia. It was instigated as basically an effort to undermine Moldovan basically statehood and development. At that moment, we became independent. A few years before that, we have been declaring our sovereignty from Soviet Union. And the country was really looking on the way to get out of the influence that we had before. And that war actually appeared, there were the different aspects of it, but it was for surely what we can look now back in the future it was an instigated war just to undermine our future development as a state, as a young state. And there, of course, Russia had an important role, and today Russia has an important role as well from different perspectives. Russia is part of the negotiation format process, which is formally 5+2, where we have also US and the European Union embarking since mid-2000s. And yeah, I mean, if to look today at the state of play, we have a frozen conflict. Transnistrian conflict, I think, is the only frozen conflict in the region. The other have been unfrozen. I mean, look in, recently Nagorno-Karabakh, where, of course, it was a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but Russia had a role by inaction, actually. The situation which happened in Nagorno-Karabakh actually undermined further the country's objectives. We had Ukraine, developments back in 2004 and everything which is happening today. You had 2008, you had Ossetia, Georgia, the war with Russia. And yeah, conflict, Transnistrian conflict today is the only unfrozen conflict. And that is a fact. Whether there is a potential for this conflict to be unfrozen, looking at the Russian interest in the region and Russian agenda, and also globally, and the interactions across Atlantic with the US, on the continent with the European Union, you see that Russia has a very, very much aggressive stance, undermining the sovereignty of countries in the region, trying to promote their role as basically a country that tries to preserve their kind of influence over these countries. It's interesting, another element of actuality which is happening today. For example, in Moscow these days, we had the visit of the former president Dodon, and somehow coincided with the visit of the leader of Transnistrian region, Krasnoselsky, who had both meetings with Kozak, who is in charge for this file in Kremlin. And we know the story of linkages between former President Igor Dodon as being, in fact, an agent, a political agent, but also a proxy agent of Russian influence here in the country. Just to give you a perspective, between 2016 and 2019, the time of presidency of Mr. Dodon, he had a very ambitious agenda at the beginning to be to enter in the history as a politician to solve the conflict. Unfortunately, during his mandate, he did little to solve the conflict. And in the later years of his mandate, when he was president, he tried to show some actions of settlement, but somehow those actions were put in a more broader perspective of the role of the Transnistrian region in the political developments in the country, in particular manifested by participation in the elections in Moldova by the Moldovan residents in Transnistrian region that had voted massively for pro-Russian political parties in the country, in particular Socialist Party. And there was some attempts to try to increase, and actually successful at some point in 2019 and partially in 2020 during the last presidential elections, to increase the participation rate of the Transnistrian region. And in that context, somehow you had seen some developments of talks between Dodon, then president and leader of Transnistrian region, and mediation, which is done by Kozak. You know Kozak very well. He was also the author of memorandum in 2003 that attempted to find a long-standing, a long-term solution for the conflict. This one had a lot of mini bombs installed in the memorandum, and which, after having been exposed, this memorandum was rejected by the former president Voronin. And
Right.
from that on, what we have seen a changing position of Russian Federation towards Moldova, applying a number of embargoes, trade embargoes, which at that time was very much dependent on the Russian market, applying other instruments to basically show discontent with the change of position in the country, even though Voronin was a very much pro-Russian politician, who was voted in 2001 as president, and as his party, the Communist Party, was the one promoting the union of Russia, Belarus, and Moldova. That changed after 2003. So in that context, today, for example, I think yesterday there was a meeting of Krasnoselsky and Dodon, allegedly, with Mr. Kozak. They discussed some issues. I mean, Mr. Dodon does not have any political public function in the state. He's
Right.
with the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party is still one of the parties in the parliament that has the biggest numbers of seats. Still, they don't have a clear majority. They're now striking a majority with another party, which is a party of fugitive little oligarch, Mr. Shore, who basically was indicted to be part of, and benefiting basically from the famous billion-dollar fraud combination from 2000, which was exposed in 2014. So this guy was convicted in the first instance by the court, and already for 3 years, I think, in the Court of Appeal, his criminal file is being postponed. But this politician entered in the parliament in 2019, and now they're striking basically a majority between this party and Socialist Party, trying to impose their agenda on the country. But in the meantime, the situation is changing. We have a new president, which is largely supported by the Moldovan citizens. I mean, in 2020's elections in autumn, Maia Sandu was elected by almost 1 million citizens of Moldova. So there is no other politician in the country since 1991. We established as a country that has been supported so far. So in so large numbers, and moreover, there is no political party which was supported in those numbers. So, giving you the perspective today, just to conclude on your first question, there is no serious developments in the settlement process today. We don't have already for more than 2 years talks in the 5+2 format, which is the official format of negotiations. There were attempts before of one-to-one talks between the Deputy Prime Minister for Integration and the representative of Transnistrian region in this context. There were other working groups talks at the technical level. Before there was, as I mentioned, in 2019, there was also a meeting between the president of Dodon, who received Mr. Krasnoselsky and basically trying to indicate that he's even accepting his status as not only the leader of the Transnistrian region, but he called him as the president of the Transnistria, which is very strange for an acting president to act undermining basically our sovereignty and territorial integrity. Today, the conflict is frozen, and today there are no talks in the process. There are a lot of implications for that. First, because Moldova is already for some years in some political instability process, and that is, of course, impacting the negotiation process. The negotiation format includes 4 baskets. One of them, which is in stalemate, is the political settlement, and that is the most important element. And there are more and more voices across the expert community and former officials or acting officials about the speed of the process of the settlement, and many observers and experts indicate to the fact that at this time when Moldova is again at a crossroads, being in a very political unstable situation,
Right.
It's not the right moment to discuss political settlements because that may undermine further. Any solution should be supported should have a cross-party support, and should take into account the main principles of the settlement, which was agreed in the format, which are reflected in our constitution, that any settlement should respect our constitution, which means that the territorial integrity, the sovereignty of the country should be respected. And that means that Transnistrian region should be not only should be part of the country, as today the region, the control of the national authorities in the region is, there is no such a control there. So that is, I think, a brief context with a brief background that today we are not moving, or there are no indications towards moving to the political settlement of the process for different reasons that I tried to indicate.
Well, let me ask you this: is there any utility left for the 5+2, so-called 5+2 format group? We had a recent paper submitted from Ambassador Richard Hoagland with a similar thesis about the Minsk group with regard to Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, is there any utility for this group anymore? Is there anything left for them to do?
Yes, because the mandate of this format and the principles on which this format has been established, they are not exhausted yet. So unfortunately, even though the format was not efficient enough over time to reach settlement, however, it provides the format still of the settlement process with different speeds and different motivation. But that is the only format that can legitimize any settlement so far of the Transnistrian conflict, where you have a balanced representation of Russia, Ukraine, US, EU, OSCE. So that is the only format that can contribute to the settlement so far, until a new format that would try to better preserve the principles of the settlement of this conflict and the objectives appears.
I'm going to skip over my third point and go, because you spent a lot of time on President Sendu. I mean, she made a lot of, I wouldn't say promises, but declarations in her campaign calling for the departure of Russian peacekeeping troops, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, what do you see this role in this new administration in terms of bringing, unfreezing this conflict, not making it hot, in other words, but bringing it to some kind of resolution, versus the previous administration's very obvious affinity for Moscow and the breakaway region? I mean, what do you see as her role, and can she use her popularity to push this forward? Where do you see any indication, in terms of a firm policy points, indeed, so young in the administration, to move this forward towards resolution?
Well, first, what I think is important to say is that the calls for the withdrawal of Russian troops, which are illegally staying, and this is the Russian troops which are protecting the munitions in Transnistrian region, is a call. It's a consistent call of the Moldovan authorities throughout the years. That was a position which was voiced after 1999. I mean, in 1999, the Istanbul commitments of Russia Federation to withdraw from troops from the Transnistrian region, that process started, but suspended after the rejection of the memorandum Kozak. Still, there is an obligation that Russia Federation took in the format of OSCE that they do not exclude to be fully implemented, but they say that they will withdraw whenever, after the settlement of the process. However, these are the very much connected elements, and that should be seen in that context. So what President Sandu, during her campaign, but after, in particular, when she became elected president, voiced a position which is consistent with the Moldovan position, which was voiced by former President Voronin, which was promoted by the former President Timofti, which was voiced by President Dodon in different formats. Just to recall also the very active diplomatic action which the Moldovan foreign minister did in 2018. There was a resolution which was promoted and supported in the General Assembly of the UN, calling for Russian withdrawal of troops. So there is a consistency there. So what President Sandu did, she just reconfirmed the national position on that. And the immediate reactions, critical reactions, which came after from the Foreign Office of Russia Federation, from Kremlin, about trying to indicate that is something unprecedented, I would put it in a very mild way as an attempt to create disinformation, and not to say more. So in that sense, I think the role of the president in the country, and you have to understand that Moldova is a semi-parliamentarian country.
Exactly.
Parliamentarian regime, where still the parliament has a very important role. However, after 2016's amendments of change back of the constitution to direct elections, the president is elected directly by the citizens. So that indirectly the element of role of the president being elected, amended by the people has. However, still the government is doing the executive, is representing executive power, and president has a role, a very active role in terms of the security and defense of the country, being the main commander of the army, and the president is exercising or participating in foreign policy agenda. So that is important, just to see the perspective of how the president in Moldova is involved in the issues of security and conflict settlement. So basically, in that sense, the mandate for the process is with the government, and the president, of course, is there to defend and promote the interests in interacting with counterparts in. So now the president, of course, would advance further the national position. And also the president has exposed an element which is, I think it's important to talk more and more about. This conflict in Transnistria region should be perceived, I mean, one should look at it as also, if you want, an artificial conflict, because if to compare with other conflicts where you had very much ethnic component or religious component, this conflict is not manifested by that. It's a frozen conflict. On the habitual or day-to-day basis, there is no conflict between citizens. There are a lot of efforts to bridge the banks of the Dnistro River. We circulate, regular citizens can circulate, can travel from time to time. Of course, that is from time to time also used by the Transnistrian authorities to undermine some parallel processes, trying to bargain in the negotiations and so on and so forth. But in fact, this conflict is not ethnic based. This conflict is artificial, and this conflict is there to preserve the status quo, which is trying to basically create from the region as a black hole for contrabanda, for smuggling, and for keeping Moldova somehow hostage in this context where, I mean, Moldova being an energy dependent country from Russian Federation. Right. For example, we have the state company Moldova Gas is in debt with Gazprom now, I think, with over $7 billion, and 95% of this debt is generated from unpaid invoices by the Transnistrian region. And it's interesting to say that Gazprom has an important role in the Moldovan gas company, being one of the biggest shareholders, not having the control over decisions, the final control of the decision, but still, Moldova Gas is a Gazprom company.
Well, let me backtrack because one of my questions was about the ethnic component of this conflict, and what you're saying, it seems to almost mirror what's going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan, where some people were trying to couch it in terms of a Christian versus Muslim conflict, when it really was not. And the people there had been interacting for centuries without difficulty until the political forces, that wanted to mobilize for various reasons, be it for resources or for power, etc., manipulated that. It seems to me you're saying almost the same thing, that this was not that the entire rebellion, if you want to call it that, was the ethnic component was a mere pretext. And indeed, I guess the Gagos people, who are the Orthodox community, they never really split from Moldova, but they did attain apparently some autonomous status in 1994. But there was never some kind of rebellion based on preserving someone's ethnic identity. So you're saying basically this whole thing was a pretext. Is that correct?
It was a pretext. Definitely, the Transnistrian conflict is not an interethnic conflict. It's a conflict to keep Moldova basically unsecure, to undermine our sovereignty, because that is probably much easier for actors who want to keep the country hostage to their influence, to be these to be preserved. And then there are a lot of local interests. The region is, as I tried to indicate, is very much kind of a black hole or offshore region where businesses operate. A lot of smuggling has been happening, and I think
that's on the border. That there was a problem with that, along with Armenia and Azerbaijan as well. Yes.
After the war in Ukraine started, that component started to decrease, because Ukrainian side also started to be more effective in controlling the movements of goods and persons and everything from the security perspective as well. But this is definitely one of the main elements of this conflict, is that it is preserved in such a way so that to benefit vested interests, to benefit businesses or politicians or vested interests outside the country. I will give you just one example. Over the last 2 years, when the President Dodon was president, his brother, Dodon's brother, managed to strike a partnership with Mr. Chaika, who is the son of the former Prosecutor General of Russia. And they actually managed to build in Transnistrian region a Bitcoin farm, and that is operating fine. And it's interesting how that was possible, because the elements of that farm were actually transported through Moldovan territory to the region, and that was fine somehow. But it is interesting that the brother of Dodon managed to create this one business, but they have a lot of businesses also in Russia. Just recently, Chaika's company in the partnership with brother of Dodon managed to participate in the different very important state contracts in Russian Federation, and so on and so forth. So just one example how the business, political and security components are somehow interconnected. And the main element of it, of course, is to try to keep the status quo as much as possible, because there are other interests there. There is a sheriff company in the region, which is now basically one of the actives. There is interest. So from that perspective, also Mr. Krasnoselsky, and so on and so forth. So they would just be fine to keep the status quo as much as possible, so that they can operate as much as possible with different, hidden type of economy of operations. And from time to time to travel to Moscow. I mean, it has to be mentioned that the relationship between Moscow and Krasnoselsky, they're not always very good, very well.
Right.
But at the same time, look, I mean, yesterday they traveled most likely together with Mr. Dodon to Kozak and sit together and talked about vaccination Sputnik V, how to speak Sputnik V to be donated to Moldova and Central region.
Let me go now, because we did touch on some of the pretext for this rebellion, if you will. Moldova was part of Romania, particularly between the two world wars. What role does Romania have in settling this conflict? What role does Romania have in basically the security? I know that's not your expertise, but I mean, does Romania have a security role? Does Romania have an interest in stopping smuggling and crime there? Does Romania even have a historical emotional affinity for helping the region? Please explain that, because there are a lot of people in the United States that are confused about, who still think, believe it or not, that Moldova is part of Romania. Some of our educational system isn't all that great when it comes to Eastern Europe. But please explain Romania's role then and what you think it should be now.
Well, some of the scholars may be right, because you know that in Romania there is a region called Moldova.
Right.
So maybe because of that, Republic of Moldova indeed was part of Romania in the interbellum period, we have a lot of affinities with Romania. We have the same culture, we have very much sharing the history, very much sharing the language. We share a lot of values together. Because indeed, historically, de facto Moldova was part of Romania during the interbellum period, but before, in the history, we had a lot of affinities that were in the history. So we have, that is first thing to be mentioned. Second, Romania today and before, indeed, is very important neighbor. Romania is one of the two neighbors that Moldova has. It's Romania and Ukraine. And after the Moldova declared independence in 1991, and before, when we declared our sovereignty, of course, the movement of reunification with Romania was very much at that time, particularly because after the Moldova was basically annexed by Soviet Union after the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement. There was a tendency to come back, and there was a policy of denationalization during the Soviet time, of course, in Moldova. But after the independence, Moldova became independent. In the meantime, there was a change of power in Romania, and there was a momentum probably of reunification at that time, which didn't happen. Romania was among the first countries to recognize our independence at that time. So the relationship with Romania has developed from that perspective. And for many years, until Romania joined the European Union, we were traveling without passports, just with ID. There was a lot of interconnection, people-to-people contact. There was a lot of connection between the two countries. After Romania joined the European Union, of course, that has been reviewed because there are EU rules and so on and so forth. Today, Romania is a NATO member. Romania is a European Union member state, a very active one. And also, Romania is one of the key strategic partners of US in the region, also from the perspective of the security and NATO. So in that sense, yeah, Romania has an important role from the security perspective. We are bordering with a NATO border. That is an element which has to be mentioned in the broader perspective. At the same time, Romania, being member of the European Union, was advocating since Romania became member of the European Union, the European integration of Moldova. And Moldova foreign policy and internal policy was very much shaped by European integration, joining the European Union in particular since 2005, when there was a cross-party consensus in the country that we should choose this way. And Romania was a natural advocate, a natural promoter of Moldova in the European Union, and very much supportive of the reform agenda of the country. In the last years, Romania also tried to go beyond political support, but also to support the country by development programs, by special development programs. Over 100 million euros has been invested in the country over the last years, more to come. And I think it is interesting in today's context to talk about, if you mentioned about the region, from Transnistrian region, just to give you one episode. Romania was the first country to supply vaccines to Moldova. At the beginning of this year, the president of Romania has visited Moldova and had a meeting with the President Sandu. He was among the first leaders to talk on that level and try to rebuild our bilateral relations with Romania that have been undermined during President Dodon's time. So after that visit, the President Iohannis promised to Moldova at least 200,000 doses of vaccines. At that time, Moldova did not have an even budget or plan to buy vaccines, so that it was very important. So these vaccines started to come, and a good part of these vaccines have been shared to Transnistrian region. To vaccinate medical workers, all those who are part of the vaccination program. And for some time, Mr. Krasnoselski at some point has tried to hide the element that vaccines which are supplied to Transnistrian region were originating from Europe, from Romania. But then he changed his discourse and recognized that was a donation from Romania. But still, they didn't start the vaccination program. And after 2-3 weeks, after keeping the doses in deposit, waiting for Russian vaccine to come, Sputnik V to come, which was not coming and still is not there, they decided to start the vaccination process in Transnistrian region, and recognizing the support that that Romania has done to Moldova and to the medical workers in Transnistrian region. So this is how Romania is trying to help. Romania is trying to help by development, by supporting projects. A lot of support is given, of course, to infrastructure projects, to educational projects, rebuilding schools, kindergartens in the country, irrespective of the region, including in Gagauz region, which is the Gagauz autonomy. Romania has managed to support a lot of projects. Gagauz autonomy is a beneficiary, very good great beneficiary of the development support coming also from Romania. So Romania is trying to build bridges and to try to demyth the element of the Soviet propaganda and Russian propaganda that Romanian tanks will come and occupy the Gagauz autonomy, or they will occupy Transnistrian region, and so on and so forth, which is of course fake. There is no intention and there is no interest of Romania to do that, but to support Moldova's development, Moldova's reform agenda, and also to support the development of this country as a democratic state and the country which is indeed trying to address real issues in the country. Politicians, on the other hand, in Moldova, try to explore this element of interethnic confrontation, yes, addressing issues of language or ethnicity, and so on and so forth. And this actually divided the society a lot through years. Now the situation is a bit changing. Even the vote of the citizens in the presidential elections in autumn last year showed that people started to go beyond these geopolitical confrontations and interethnic confrontations, and even this myth that the country is divided between pro-Russians who are, or Russian community, Russian-speaking community, which is mainly for Russia, go through Eurasian Economic Union, and the other members of the society in Moldova, they are for the European Union. Now that myth has been debunked in the elections, where we had over almost 1 million citizens, Russian communities and so on and so forth, Russian-speaking communities voting for the president, because the president, Sandu, had an agenda which was addressing the long-standing issues of the country, which is corruption.
Right.
And that is more resonating now with the people, less the geopolitical discourse. Even though the President Dodon during the campaign tried to attack the element, tried again to divide the society of the inter-ethnic elements, but apparently the society was started to be more immune to this type of calls.
Let me ask you, I was going to talk about NATO, but I want to jump to this last question, and then you can conclude any way you want. In a situation where the region is reintegrated or reunited with Moldova, what do you see the role of the current Transnistrian leaders in the country's governance? I mean, should they step down in favor of people who are more in tune with these current issues and not division, or should they participate? Is this process called federation, or is it reintegration? What do you see as that moment where reunification is possible, and what do you see in store for the leaders?
Well, that's still to be seen. Unfortunately, after almost 30 years of this conflict, which was frozen back in 1992 after it started. The agenda is to reintegrate the country, and Moldovan authorities have a very clear position in that sense. Any reintegration solution should be respecting the constitution of the country and the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty of the country. As I said, the political settlement, the third basket in the negotiation process, has not been opened. That is part of that process. So depending on the way how the political settlement will be done, then we will see the ways, what role different actors will have. Unfortunately, as from where we are today, the moment of political settlement is a bit far. Also because the negotiating positions of Chisinau and the statements of Tiraspol, they are divergent. Transnistrian region is skipping the agenda of trying to legitimize their independence and looking for different ways of legitimization of separatism, right? Which is de facto accepted by only one party in the negotiation format, which is Russian Federation, even though officially in the URIA they are not stating that. But there are different indications showing that de facto they are somehow favoring that position, or at least the status quo. So far, there are less indications for the support of all participants in the negotiation format to push the sides to start the political settlement process on the terms of the integration of the country. That is the position which is supported officially by all parties. So to conclude on that, we will see in the future how the settlement process will develop. And now I think the biggest or the minimum situation is to not harm the process, and that somehow is dictated by is dictating also the positions of different parties in the process. And as I said at the beginning of our discussion, Transnistrian region is the only unfrozen conflict, and indeed there is no interest in this country or from any politician, at least a responsible politician who is acting in the interest of the country, to unfroze this conflict, especially as Moldova does not have any intention to do any kinetic or aggressive actions to impose military control over the region. Those who are doing military exercises, also with together with the Russian troops in Transnistrian region, they are the military troops in Transnistrian region, and they are doing that more than Moldovan military and army. Sorry. So in that sense, now the biggest probable challenge is to not unfroze the conflict, but at the same time to go beyond the status quo in direction of reintegration of the country. How that should be done, when it should be done, that is the biggest question today. Because I mean, we organized a few weeks ago a discussion with former officials and acting officials involved in the settlement process, and what we heard is that there is an intention to develop a joint or a national kind of vision for the integration, or to update or to improve the national vision into the integration process and in the conflict settlement, which would be promoted by all political actors in the country. So that process is still there. We will look forward to see how all parties in the 5+2 format are acting. In the meantime, the OSCE mission has to be more active in trying to monitoring and exposing any actions of that undermines the commitments which have been agreed.
Exactly.
And trying to contribute to basically bridging between the banks, reaching out to hearts and minds of Moldovan citizens residing in the Transnistrian region, providing opportunities for that, and most important, respect and do a national, international action to promote and preserve human rights in the Transnistrian region, which now is the biggest issue in the region. There are a lot of violations of human rights. There is a lot of actions basically limiting free speech and thinking, and that is important, of course. But then today we also I mean, the situation, the crisis is added up by also the pandemics, which unfortunately is also exploited by some of the political actors.
Yes, and I was reading recently that some of the smuggling has to do with PPE and other medical supplies, bootleg, as we say in the United States. Mr. Groza, thank you so much for your insights.
Welcome.
Again, this interview will be posted on our website, www.icrcenter.org, and you can follow it on Twitter at Conflict Center. We thank you and hope that you will join us again in the future, and we would love to join you in whatever joint research projects that we could probably find mutually fruitful. And thank you and good day.
Thank you. Good luck. Thank you.